Hi everyone, my name is Avram K, and you're watching Alfei Panim, our special Purim edition for Purim 2025. I recently came across the works of a Rav by the name of Rav Avram Naftali Galanti, a Talmud Chacham who lived in the United States about 100 years ago. He has a really beautiful drasha about Purim based on the following Gemara. Amar Rava said, Leka diyeda lishna bisha kahaman. Rava said there was no one who knew how to slander like Haman. The Gemara proceeds to describe the details of the conversation between Haman and Achashverosh, essentially their negotiations for the elimination of the Jewish people. Rav Galanti asks, what did Rava find in Haman's words that was so effective? If we look at how the Gemara describes the conversation between Haman and Achashverosh, it would seem that Haman's arguments against the Jews are not really all that compelling, and in some cases even self-contradictory. First, he says that we are asleep regarding mitzvahs, that we're not keeping the Torah properly, and then he uses the Jews' mitzvah observance as a way to criticize them. In order to find an answer, Rav Galanti says we need to explore more deeply the political situation, the social situation in those times. From all indications in the Megillah, it would seem that Achashverosh was a relatively liberal monarch. He sent out public announcements in all the different languages of his subjects, something a real despot would never do. Everyone would be forced to speak the language of the land. He invited representatives from all over the empire to join his months-long celebration, showing his respect for other people and their cultures. He instructed his staff to fulfill each man's wishes and desires, a true liberal. His kingdom also included the Jews, displaced from their land and spread throughout the empire. Their ultimate fate now hung in the balance. Koresh, Achashverosh's predecessor, had actually begun the process of preparing to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, gathering funds and materials. But before that could happen, Achashverosh came into power with no clear path forward for his Jewish subjects. At the advice of his counselors, any work on rebuilding Yerushalayim and the temple was suspended. Now let us focus on the fateful negotiations between Haman and Achashverosh. Vayoma Haman lemelech Achashverosh. Haman said to the king Achashverosh, Yeshna am echad, mifuzah mufurad bein ha'amim. There's a people who are spread throughout the land between the other nations. B'chomedidais malchusach, in all the provinces of your kingdom. V'datayim shnois mikol am, and their ways, their laws are different from everyone else. And the rules of the king, the laws of the king, they don't do. And it's not worth it for the king to let them stay there like that. If it pleases the king, let it be written to annihilate them. And I will weigh out 10,000 talents of silver to the workmen to bring to the king's treasury. And then the faithful words of Megillah say that the king removed his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hamadassah, the Agagi, enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, HaKesef nasim, the money is given to you. The king said to Haman, the silver is given to you, and the nation you can do with them as you see fit. There are a number of things about this exchange that are hard to understand. Is it really possible that one of the highest officers in the most powerful nation on earth would casually offer a bribe, however substantial, to the king, already fabulously wealthy, to wipe out an entire nation from among his subjects, to physically annihilate and execute a whole nation? And what did it mean when it said, HaKesef nasim, the money is given to you? It should have said, HaKesef lo titen li, you don't have to give me any money. Haman had offered Achashverosh money, and now he was saying you can keep the money. That's how we understand it. Finally, we have the big confrontation at the feast where Esther describes the one who wishes to annihilate her and her people. Achashverosh's answer is surprising, to say the least. Vayomer HaMelech Achashverosh, the king Achashverosh said, Vayomer Esther, and he said to Esther Hamalka, Esther the queen, Mihu zeh ve'ezehu, asher milu libo lasos kain. He said, who is this, and which is he who has presumed to do such a thing? Was the king really so divorced from reality that he couldn't figure out who Esther was referring to? Hadn't he given the signet ring to Haman for such a purpose? Were there other entire nations that he had recently agreed to wipe out, and he wasn't sure which one she was talking about? And why was Achashverosh so very angry at Haman? Haman hadn't known that Esther was a Jew. He wasn't intentionally plotting against her. Rav Galanti then suggests a new perspective on the story, which I found fascinating. He argues that Achashverosh never, in fact, authorized Haman to eradicate the Jewish people, not in the way that we imagine. He suggests that Achashverosh believed that Haman was talking about eradicating the Jews as a people. In other words, to assimilate them completely into Persian society. And any of them with useful skills and talents could productively use them towards building a stronger Persian empire, instead of idling around entertaining a pointless fantasy about returning to the land of Israel. His arguments, which we thought seemed so ineffectual, would then in fact be diabolically clever. Traditionally, anti-Semites trying to do harm to the Jews portray them as devious and cunning and powerful, just waiting for a chance to take over the world. Haman's words paint a very different picture. His version is that the Jews were spread out and not united. They were lazy and indolent and contributed little to society. They clung to their old-fashioned customs instead of being good citizens of Persia. And those poor, misbegotten people who had fallen out of favor with Hashem still harbored a fanciful notion of one day returning to their own land with a rebuilt Beis HaMikdash. Is this compassion, Haman argued? Is this humane? Is this fair to the rest of your loyal subjects that we tolerate their antisocial behavior and blatant disregard for the king's laws? It is far better to rehabilitate them into productive members of society and thereby eliminate them as a unique people. And the money? What money were they talking about? There was money that Kairosh had set aside to rebuild the temple, a fortune. That money was then placed under Haman's control. HaKesef nosun lach. The money is given to you, Haman, to use for the common good of the kingdom. Thus, at Esther's feast, when she described how there was a horrible plot to physically annihilate her entire people, the king honestly had no idea what she was talking about. He had only agreed to some social engineering, not to genocide. From this perspective, we clearly see Haman's terrible virtuosity in manipulating the king. Achashverosh was a liberal. He had egalitarian values. He envisioned a cosmopolitan society. He would never sanction all-out murder. He truly believed he was doing something positive. Of course, this is not meant to imply that he was in any way a righteous person. He obviously intended to eliminate the Jewish people, just not through actual violence. And Haman abused the king's authority and nearly succeeded in physically wiping out all of the Jewish people. This explains Achashverosh's fury, as he had been duped and misled by his trusted minister. Have a freilich and Purim. My name is Avram K., and you're watching Alfei Panim.